Hello and welcome to another episode of Be the Bank. My name is Robert Heitha, founder of FIXnotes, and it's my job to teach you about the secondary mortgage market. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you join us on Wednesdays at 1 p.m., you can catch this show live, ask questions, hang out with me for a bit. But if you're tuning in after the fact, we'll get right into the show. You can look at the description or both the description and the scrubber at the bottom of this video to skip to different chapters, so you can jump to a topic that interests you, perhaps our case studies, our asset opportunities for sale, or any other thing that you may be interested as part of this show. So before we get into it, I want to thank the now 62 members of our mastermind group for making this all possible, for joining this network of like-minded note investors. And if that's something you're interested in, you can learn more at the end of the show. But for now, we're going to get right into it. We're going to be talking about technology and how in the next phase of this crazy internet economy that we live in, living above or below the API, operating above or below the API is going to be a critical factor for your success and longevity in business. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, I was just, sorry about that. Just getting our camera angles changed up. We've got the bird cam, which I failed. And we've also got a telephoto bird cam lens over here, which hopefully will catch something interesting. And then the koi cam is back. Now, the pond is absolutely covered in pollen right now, but we'll have some fish friends to hang out with while we proceed with the show here. Okay, so I'm gonna fix this one while we're at it. That's a little bit better. All right, so today's episode number 32, and we're gonna start out with some free resources that we offer at FIXnotes.com, just to give you a high-level overview of the industry to get into the business. And then we're gonna talk overview as far as pricing and due diligence and how to get into this space tactically. Then we're gonna be talking tech, and there's our first bird friend. After we get through the tech section, which is kind of the feature of the show, the API, living above and below the API, then we're going to be talking about how to participate in upcoming asset acquisition opportunities. Then case studies, of course, we got 2 great case studies for you. Then giveaways, how to get on a free consultation with me. So definitely stick around until the end, and let's get right into the show here. And let me close my door too. I'm so unprepared here. Okay, so the first and primary place you should start if you've never heard of notes before is FIXnotes.com/learn. We've got a course to learn how to be the bank. So this is really everything you need from A to Z to get started in this business. And you can start it totally for free, and then we'll ask you for your email address, but it is 100% free to go through this course. I highly recommend you do so. To answer a lot of the frequently asked questions that you may have just from watching this show. Then we've got FIXnotes.com/news. This is a news aggregator with, I use an RSS feed to pump in industry news from across the internet. And then I aggregate this about twice a week. I will look through articles and choose the ones that I think are most relevant, and I add them here to FIXnotes.com/news. FIXnotes.com/terms is part of the course. It's the distressed debt glossary. It's a new language sometimes to get into the space, and by reviewing this glossary or just using it as a reference point, you can translate some of the language that you may hear in the industry. Okay, so now we're into the industry overview here, and I'm gonna recap slightly what we've done in the past couple weeks, and then we'll get to today's focus in the industry overview section, which is bankruptcy. So we'll start here with the mortgage note investment options. And let me do this. Mortgage notes are able to be invested in a lot of different ways. One of those ways is through a mortgage note fund on the far end as far as being a passive investment. Then we get into equity partnerships with private investors, partial acquisitions, which is basically buying a string of cash flow with not the entire note transferred, but just a portion of the cash flow of a performing note. Then we have buying cash flowing whole loans where you buy the entire loan and all of the payments. And then finally, buying and working out non-performing loans. And have these headphones on to just check my levels, but we're going to pull them off for now and continue on with buying and working out loans. The focus of this show, this primary reason for the FIXnotes Be the Bank show, is to teach you how to work in the non-performing loan space. And if you understand this, the far end of the curve, the very active way to invest in notes, then everything else falls into line because you'll understand the end goal and also the process to get there. So when you're talking about buying non-performing loans, you really need to understand pricing, because without understanding what a loan is worth, it's hard to make educated offers when you're actually looking to acquire mortgage loans for sale. So I've got this chart split into reperforming and non-performing assets. And as you can see, reperforming is priced based on yield, while non-performing is priced based on a discount percentage. We price first liens based on the discount to fair market value. We price second liens based on the discount to unpaid principal balance. So this is generally the high level pricing from the yield side for reperforming loans, so actually calculating how much of a return you're going to be getting, almost always in the double digits. I mean, senior liens sometimes are less than 10% cash on cash returns. Juniors are generally always 10% or more cash on cash returns. And now that's the amount of capital you're going to recoup on your investment in every year of holding. So essentially in a junior lien at 11%, you'd break even in less than 10 years, at 20% in less than 5 years. And on the senior lien side, because you're more protected, those yields are a bit lower. Now, the sweet spot for us is junior liens, and that's generally the focus of this show. Both reperforming juniors and non-performing junior liens, I believe, are the best bang for your buck in this business, and also the most effective way to help borrowers. In senior liens, you get into some situations where the borrower doesn't want the property, and you can have a lot of difficulty with getting a resolution done because the only way to resolve the debt is to actually take back the home and manage an REO, a real estate owned, which is a lot more difficult than just working out a deal with a borrower, which happens much more often in junior liens. So after we know what the pricing is, we really need to understand how to determine that pricing. And we use the non-performing waterfall evaluation to do so. So the non-performing waterfall evaluation gives us everything we need to analyze an asset from start to finish. So in the beginning, we're looking at secured versus unsecured. And let me actually just show you this beautiful woodpecker. Got a great view today. Oh, see you later, dude. Once we know that it's secured, we can move on to the next phase. A secured lien can be enforced through foreclosure, whereas an unsecured lien is only pursued through the promissory note. So it's essentially like a credit card debt. It's a little bit more expensive to purchase unsecured mortgage notes rather than unsecured credit card debt because of the underwriting that went into that mortgage loan origination in the first place. But that's kind of besides the point. We don't do much discussion on unsecured debt on the show. We talk about secured loans because that's where win-win solutions with the borrowers are most readily available. And once you know that it's secured, it's really a matter of the lien position, whether you're in first position or second position, or sometimes third or fourth or some other junior lien position beyond that. So that's what we talked about a couple days ago, a couple episodes ago. We started with secured versus unsecured. Then we talked about juniors versus seniors and why I believe smart money prefers seconds. And then we talked last episode about collateral valuation methods. So collateral valuation is really important because at the end of the day, your secured interest is in the real estate. The real estate's the collateral securing your loan. And if you don't have a good idea of what that property is worth, then you're going to have a very difficult time pricing that loan. In first position, like we say, the value is really based on the value of the property. And in second position loans, the value of that loan is based on the equity. And if you don't know the value of the property, you can't calculate the equity. So this was a topic for last episode's shows, so definitely go back for more in-depth information on this. Basically, varying degrees of accuracy as well as time and capital commitments to analyze collateral values, home values. And we really like the sweet spot in the middle here, and that's recently sold comps and doing a manual review of those comps. So when we do that manual review, and of course you can look at last week's episode for more detail, I'm gonna run through it quickly. I really like to use Zillow as a consistent source of data that I can run my own recently sold comps on by using the pricing tool, by using similar recently sold homes at the bottom of a Zillow listing for your subject property. And also using the map and selecting sold loans. So you can actually see where on the map other properties that have been sold in that marketplace are. So you can kind of compare lot sizes and amenities as far as, being near this park or across the street from a cemetery, or generally getting to understand the neighborhood and the potential values of other homes in that property, other homes in that neighborhood. Of course, we consider the location, the square footage, beds, baths, sold date, the construction date, and then the Google Street View to determine whether or not that property is still in decent shape. If the lawn is being kept up, if the windows are not boarded up, there's not a bunch of junk outside, and using the Google satellite as well to make sure that we have an actual property, because sometimes these homes have been demolished prior to reviewing the mortgage note. And generally the satellite image is more up to date than the Google Street View image. All right, so that brings us up to date. Now we're talking about bankruptcy, the next phase in the due diligence waterfall. And generally, the bankruptcy overview is split between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Now, we do have Chapter 11 foreclosures for businesses, something we don't often see in the residential mortgage notes that we operate with generally. And I've got a beautiful little chickadee here. I want to show you, but we just missed it. So Chapter 7 bankruptcies are a liquidation of debt, whereas Chapter 13s are a reorganization of debt. So in a liquidation of debt, there needs to be an equity limit on the homestead. So generally, if there's too much equity in the borrower's property, then they're not going to be approved for the bankruptcy. And that information is determined right in the beginning with the voluntary petition. Now, we'll talk about the voluntary petition in the tactical bankruptcy overview, which we'll cover in the next slide. Whereas a Chapter 13 is a reorganization of debt. So generally, the borrower will keep their assets in a Chapter 13 and reorganize, but that also poses a risk to junior lien holders who do not have equity in Chapter 13 positions. And we'll get to that in a minute. So with our Chapter 7, we'll jump back up to the top here. The borrower's income must be low enough to pass a means test. That also will be part of the schedules in the voluntary petition. It's generally 3 to 5 months to discharge. Chapter 7s go pretty quick. And also, Chapter 7s are much more likely to be discharged, which means successful for the borrower, than Chapter 13s. Chapter 13s are much more difficult to complete. They're longer, more involved, whereas Chapter 7s are pretty quick and relatively easier than 13s. In Chapter 7, the trustee will sell all non-exempt property to pay off these creditors. So typically with the loans that we're seeing on the secondary market, the property that secures the loans we're looking at are exempt because they're owner occupied. Now, not always, but that would mean that you would not see that property being sold in the bankruptcy. However, properties do get sold when they're not owner occupied, or if the borrower has a different approach and they do want to sell the home. And that's something that you see in the borrower's intentions as part of that voluntary petition. In Chapter 13, the borrower cannot have more than $394,000 of unsecured debt or $1.18 million of secured debt. Pretty high limits generally for the borrowers that we're seeing in these portfolios of mortgage notes. And a discharge in a Chapter 13 does not occur until the plan is complete. So that's sometimes 3 to 5 years. There's a payment plan with the court, and then the court trustee distributes those payments to the different creditors. Now, the danger with Chapter 13, as I alluded to earlier, was removing the junior lien through a lien strip or a cram down. So it's very important in Chapter 13s to look at the voluntary petition, make sure that there is equity, and then if there's close to no equity or perhaps negative equity, monitoring the docket to make sure that your lien is not stripped or crammed down, essentially making it unsecured and then completely uncollectible after the bankruptcy has been discharged. So that's the danger in Chapter 13s. Now, the tactical approach here is a step-by-step process, which kind of glosses over some of it, but it's a good place to start. First, you're going to go to pacer.gov and click on Case Locator. You can create an account on Pacer to have access to this database. It's public access to court electronic records, and that's going to be all the data that you need to review in a bankruptcy. Now, if you have the borrower's social security number, that's going to be the most certain way to get that data. You can use a name, but if there's similar names out there, you may get a bunch of hits, and then you're going to make sure you're looking at the correct borrower. So the social there is going to be your best bet. Once you pulled up the Pacer case, you're going to click on Review History and Documents. And this is going to show you all the schedules, all the motions, everything that's been filed for this particular bankruptcy process. So I open the voluntary petition and I scroll down to Schedule D. Schedule D is secured claims. So that's where your secured mortgage is going to be listed. Now, some voluntary petitions are filed before the schedules are completed, and it may be a separate document in the docket. So occasionally you'll pull up the voluntary petition and not find what you're looking for. So scroll down through the docket, find the schedules that are recorded or filed with the court perhaps a couple days later. The Schedule D is great because it not only shows you the collateral value of the property according to the borrower and their attorney, but it also shows you the value, the amount that's owed on the senior lien if you're buying a junior. So make a note of those. If you're reviewing a portfolio of mortgage notes, you want to keep a spreadsheet with all this data. So create a new column for collateral value, a new column for senior balance, both per the voluntary petition schedule. So when you're analyzing assets, you want to have a lot of different columns for something like fair market value, because you don't want to take their word for it as the borrower. You also want to review recently sold comps, as we talked about. You might pull a BPO, you might run AVMs or other sources of valuations. And then having these different data points lets you triangulate the correct value, because the borrower is going to want to lowball their collateral value potentially to make it look like they have less equity than they may have. So sometimes as a lien holder, we would need to dispute the property value if we feel that they're not being honest with the amount that it's actually worth. So make a note of the value and the balance, and then you can see how much equity is there. If there is no equity, they call it wholly unsecured. And if it is wholly unsecured, then as a Chapter 13 proceeding, you may be at risk. You're more than likely at risk of a lien strip or a cram down. So definitely take note of that with Chapter 13s and definitely with Chapter 7s as well, so that there is no risk of a motion to strip or cram down the lien. Now, once you've reviewed Schedule D, you can keep scrolling and confirm the borrower's intentions regarding the subject property. So if it's an owner-occupied home, it's probably exempt and they're probably keeping it. But if it's not owner-occupied, they will determine in their schedule of intentions what they want to do with the home, whether they want to sell it and pay off the creditors, or retain it and pay off the creditors through, the bankruptcy plan, the payment plan in Chapter 13s. But that's an important thing to check out so that you kind of understand where they're coming from and what the borrower's goal is. Because in this business, it's really about the borrower. And you don't want to go against the grain here. You want to help the borrower come to a resolution. And if they say they want to keep the property, you do what you can in your power to help them keep the property. Finally, when you're going back over to the history and documents, you review that entire docket to check for motion for relief from stay. Now, a motion for relief from stay, let me switch this. A motion for relief from stay is is a creditor's way to begin a foreclosure process on a loan that is otherwise part of the bankruptcy proceeding. Hold on. I wanted to do this. So when a bankruptcy is initiated by a borrower, all of the creditors are barred from pursuing foreclosures. That's called the stay. Everything is stayed. There's no enforcement of liens on this borrower's assets. So if this stay is filed for relief, that means that the stay, if it's approved, is now relieved, and creditors can then pursue foreclosure on the assets that secure their lien interests. So it's important to understand and important to review when you're looking at that docket to make sure that as a junior lien holder, the senior lien holder has not initiated a foreclosure following a motion for relief from stay and following a court's approval of that motion for relief from stay. So definitely something to look for, but there's some false positives there. You're going to see some motion for relief from stay on other potential assets that borrower owns. So sometimes I'll scroll through the docket and I'll be kind of nervous because I see a motion for relief from stay and then I open it up and it's for like a Harley Davidson or a car or a different property that doesn't really affect the lien secured by the collateral that we have interest in. So definitely look for motion for relief from stay, but don't get too eager and assume that if you see that it's bad. Open it up and see what asset is being pursued by the creditors. And then if that motion is filed, that doesn't mean anything until it's approved by the court. So the court needs to file a judgment on the motion for relief from stay, whether or not they're going to approve it. So that's the high level review of bankruptcy. Please leave a comment below if you have any questions. It's an important thing to consider. However, I'll give a major caveat here. I messed up again. The OCC, the Office of the Comp Controller, or the Office of the Comp Controller of the Currency, OCC is a government entity. They do not bar it entirely, but they do not recommend sales of bankruptcy accounts. So if a borrower has previously sought for relief from bankruptcy, or they're currently in a bankruptcy proceeding, those assets are very unlikely to be sold on the secondary market. Not that it's illegal to sell those assets, but it's strongly discouraged by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. So debt sales are generally done on assets that are not currently in bankruptcy. So you may not have assets that fall into this group, but it's definitely important to understand, either as an investor with a portfolio, that assets may become bankruptcy accounts, or if you do see these files on a portfolio, you want to understand what you're looking at. All right, so let's get on to the next slide here, which I think brings us into tech tips. Yes, so this is my feature for today's show. The title, Break Through the API. We're talking about breaking through from being below the API to being above the API. But before we get into that, let's quickly talk about the hardware and the software that makes this business capable to be run from anywhere in the world. Anywhere where you have a decent internet connection and a good phone or computer. We use a lot of different software solutions. Most are web-based. Podio, Pacer, as we discussed today, Citrix Podio Workflow Automation, Zapier, Right Signature, Gmail, CoreLogic, DataTree, Zillow, ProTitle, Google Sheets, and Excel, and then TransUnion and TLO. These tools allow us to gather data on the assets that we're reviewing, and also to automate and make more efficient our process when it comes to analyzing, managing the portfolio, and liquidating these assets through lien releases with the county, or to sales to investors who are more suited to analyze, to work out those loans, to create resolutions with those borrowers. So today's show, though, is going to talk about this concept of above and below the API. So it's something that was coined, a term that was coined, I think, in 2005 in a Forbes article. And it was, you can look up above the API and you can read that article. It's very, very interesting. So essentially what this is saying is that between 2005 and 2020, there's been a rise of these API businesses that essentially create automation that is then, and we'll get into it a little bit more detail. I have this slide again to explain in more detail, but essentially creating these automated systems where robots are telling people what to do. Uber, for example, is a dispatching service that is created algorithmically. It's drivers and passengers with no middle management. The middle management's been replaced entirely by the API. So there's coders designing the API, and then there's, and I'm using API pretty roughly because it also refers to the algorithms and the other technology that's behind this. But API is a nice way to kind of encapsulate that. And we'll come back to this. So let's look at the next slide here. So an API is an application programming interface. And we've talked about APIs before. It's something like what we do in Zapier to connect various web services together, to create automations, to bring data from one service into another service, to automate things. So we know what APIs are in practice through things like Zapier, but it goes way farther than that in some of these big tech companies out there today. So when you connect an API with a GUI, a graphical user interface, it lets the computer communicate with the human through this GUI or graphical user interface. So APIs plus these algorithms have enabled automation in dispatching through Uber, Instacart, Grubhub, list goes on, data entry and market research. Amazon Mechanical Turks has been around for like a decade now. It's a very, very interesting, it's basically creating data entry workers around the world on demand. You can log in and earn pennies for completing surveys or for identifying images or doing any type of task that's necessary. Like you can't do with computers, but you need a human to complete it. Mechanical Turks will facilitate that. Matchmaking, 99 Designs, Tinder, TaskRabbit, Finance, Wealthfront, Acorns, Betterment, Real Estate, Zillow, Redfin, Atom, they all offer APIs. Supply chain management, Amazon, probably better than any other company, has made their process way more efficient through APIs and through computers replacing middle management. So paired with sophisticated artificial intelligence here, every industry will be affected. So this is something really important to understand as an investor, but also just as a human interacting in the 21st century internet age, information age. So here's the warning. in the not so distant future, you will either tell the robots what to do or vice versa. So that's kind of a scary thing to think, but it's already happening. And you see a lot of jobs now being replaced by API workers, by these gig economy workers. So between 2005 and 2020, the rise of the task APIs has led to above the API jobs becoming below the API jobs. So think of it this way. Here's a taxi cab driver. He works for himself. He drives around, picks up people, drops them off, maybe gets phone calls from some of his regular business, and does his work generally on his own. He's an independent contractor. He does his thing. Now, as he ends up going through time, somewhere around the rise of Uber, it switches over. And now all of the drivers are starting to become Uber drivers. Everybody who's in the taxi business is being replaced by this simple app that riders can just hail a cab from anywhere at any time. Now, the API, the interface here between the rider and the driver, replaces all of the the actual business tasks that the cab driver had before, creating new clients, repeat business, making calls, advertising. And Uber drivers versus taxi drivers is an easy example, but there's so many other ways. Personal shoppers maybe could have had private clients before, and now everybody's using Instacart. There's so many ways that this transition has happened rather rapidly. And I know with the pandemic, everything has been significantly escalated as far as customers of Instacart and other services that are really appeal to efficiency and convenience. So now the scary part is this Uber driver who used to be a taxi driver working for himself, then became an Uber driver listening to the robots. He's just getting messages on his phone to pick up people with an address. Eventually, this is going to be a seamless transition into robots. So once self-driving cars are more prevalent and safer, instead of a driver, it's going to be a robot driver. Instead of Amazon warehouse workers listening to the robots on, where to pull a package and then where to put that package, the robots are going to do that work. So the scary part about the APIs replacing middle management is it creates a much more seamless transition from humans to robots. So it's sad because they say dead end jobs below the API, but it's hardly dead end. It's actually it's worse than dead end. These jobs are going to no longer exist as the API robots take over where the humans were previously. So this is a really important thing to understand as technology progresses, because more and more industries are going to be affected and more jobs are going to be replaced by the robots. And it's plug and play at this point because the APIs are already in place to communicate with, there's David Rose. All right, so let's jump into what you can do about it. If you're below the API, the main thing that you can do is to lean into your humanity. Lean into the things that robots can never replace because they are intrinsic to human beings. And think in terms of aspiring to be more than a cog. Don't be a robot, completing your tasks in your job, because then you can just be replaced by a robot. Be more than a robot. So here's some skills that robots have difficulty replacing. Communication, sales, public speaking, leadership. Those are things that are going to be more difficult for robots to replace. Creativity, imagination, content creation, creating original ideas, emotional intelligence, empathy and compassion, critical thinking, strategy and going with your gut. Robots don't have guts. Technology, design, installation, upkeep. There's going to be so many more roles for coders and people above the APIs actually creating these APIs. But we're not all coders. We don't all have that intrinsic skill set. So I like to look at these other areas where you can create skills, because these are skills that'll help you in all areas of your life. So definitely focus, if you're already in a below the API position, focus on ways that you can over deliver a customer experience. For example, if you're an Uber driver, you can give people the option whether or not they want to talk to you or not. But if they want to have a conversation, have a great conversation. Be above and beyond what a robot would do in that position. If you're on Instacart, if you're shopping for people, Be proactive, getting them replacements for their orders, get them fresh produce. I know many, many times throughout this pandemic when my wife has ordered groceries from Instacart, she can tell right away whether it's a really good shopper or a not so great shopper. And when it's a great shopper, she gives them a good tip because they're doing something above and beyond, making sure that she's going to be satisfied with the order when it gets dropped off. So lean into your humanity, aspire to be more than a cog. And if you want to get above the API, you got to ride the wave and tell the robots what to do. So first of all, leverage automation via APIs in your life and business. Zapier is a great way to do that easily without knowing how to code. And if you're already using web services like Google Docs and Gmail, and well, that's all in the Google suite, but even things outside of Google, for example, Typeform for surveys, or that's all I'm thinking of right now. But in my business, Podio and Podio and Zillow and all of the various APIs that we have access to, automate that, use this opportunity to leverage this automation rather than be at the mercy of it. And invest in companies that are on the cutting edge, and especially advocate for AI safety because it's going to proceed very, very quickly. And as soon as artificial intelligence is able to code themselves, then it's going to be completely exponential beyond what we've ever seen before as far as exponential growth. So you want to invest in those companies so you can ride the wave. Forge relationships with futurists, pragmatists, and idealists alike. So sorry about that puppy. There's somewhat of a balance to be had between people who are really focused on the here and now and people who are more idealists focusing on the future. So build these relationships so that you can understand the industries that other people are in and how they're being affected, and also ways to further leverage these advancements in technology. Finally, educate yourself on this technology and then build those human skills. So as far as note investors are concerned, buy notes for income, buy real estate for long-term security, and then keep an eye on the technology and position yourself where you can to enjoy the benefits of it while also avoiding the pitfalls of being stuck in a dead end below the API type of position where you don't have the skills to exceed that. Now, in speaking about AI safety, one other thing to mention here is universal basic income. And I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I do think in a world where robots are taking over, something like UBI would be very, very important to kind of smooth over these new class divisions that we're going to see. Now, being above the API, you're going to benefit from that exponential growth and really outpace the rest of humanity. The people who are below the API are going to be in such a difficult position that eventually all of those jobs are going to be replaced by way cheaper robotic assistants, robotic drivers, robot warehouse workers, robot shoppers all over the place. And having something like universal basic income would allow the have-nots in this case, the people who didn't watch this presentation and didn't get on board with ways to get ahead of the curve here, to live, it's going to be very important. So, and also with robots taking over all of these more low-wage jobs, I think that there's going to be more than enough wealth and prosperity to go around. And rather than just concentrate that into you and me, our hands, because we're ahead of the curve here, it'll allow other people to continue to have a good life and be able to afford groceries. So that's it for below and above the API. Please leave a comment. I'm by no means an expert on this, but it's definitely something that I've considered and continue to monitor. So I'll keep you guys posted on things that I see. I highly recommend that you do the same. All right, so let's jump into assets for sale here. And the next offering coming up is late summer. So I just had a call with US Mortgage Resolution, my main client in the portfolio management side of my business, about when they're going to have more assets available for sale. And it's looking like late summer we'll have some non-performing seconds and presumably also some first liens as well. Now, Mastermind members at that time in June when we release our next offering will have total access to all of the assets that are available. And regular non-disclosure agreement signers, it's totally free to sign the NDA and get on our list, are going to have a reduced list of assets. So you'll still have opportunities to buy loans. as a non-disclosure agreement signer, but to see everything that we've got for sale, definitely consider joining the Mastermind group. Now, Mastermind members have access to something called the aggregated trade desk. And we've already listed over $4.25 billion of unpaid principal balance in 2021 alone on the aggregated trade desk. So all of our Mastermind members have access to not only assets that I directly represent through my clients, but also assets around the marketplace through the aggregated trade desk. And by the way, you can also list assets for sale as a Mastermind member at no additional cost. So if you've got a portfolio, you want to sell loans, definitely consider joining the Mastermind group to put those assets out to our members. So let's go on to the case studies here. So today's case studies start with a discounted payoff on a non-performing second secured by a single family residential property. Now, this particular deal was paid off for $7,098. And let's get into it here. Value on this was $173,800. We have no idea what the senior lien balance was in this case. And the unpaid principal balance was $14,197. So we bought this loan for about $2,000 and we asked the borrower 3 questions. What happened? Where are you now? And what do you want to do? So in this case, it was unemployment, medical expenses, and divorce. Also, the loan service transfer had some confusion around it. The borrower didn't know who to contact to resolve the loan. So after buying this loan and recording our assignment of mortgage in the county record, and then sending out our hello RESPA letter, now the borrower knows who to contact, who to work with to resolve this debt. So we actually sent out a letter campaign with a discounted settlement offer of 50% on the dollar. And that 50% settlement was offered in this case because the borrower was in a position that we didn't know the senior lien balance, and we'd be happy with a 50% payoff here because we bought the loan for $2,000. So they responded to that letter campaign and they said they'd be happy to pay 50% settlement. So in this case, what do they want to do? They want to settle the loan with a discounted payoff. So our 14% of UPB purchase, $2,000 acquisition, after 11 months of collection and management portfolio expenses across due diligence, onboarding, and collections totaled $370. We resulted in a $7,098 payoff, about 50%. So in this case, there's a couple takeaways here. Settlement proceeds were paid out of a home sale. So what was interesting here was that it was essentially a short sale, but the borrower was proactive in reaching out to the lender, to my client in this case, who I was managing the portfolio for, and get a 50% settlement approved before they completed the home sale. So often a short sale will be initiated by the realtor, and we'll get a call when they're pretty close to closing and saying, we need to settle this debt, the loan, there's no equity, we need to get a discount. And then it's a negotiation with the realtor. Generally looking at the HUD, which is the settlement statement, to see what the first lien's being paid, what the realtors are being paid, all of the other expenses that are going into that sale. But in this case, the borrower was very savvy. They came to us directly. So important thing to understand here is to balance letter campaign incentives with timing, efficiency, and available data. In this case, we were happy about that 50% settlement. We were okay with it, but we left some money on the table here. And if we had not put that offer out there, we would have eventually been reached out to by the realtor. And then looking at the HUD, we could have understood what the senior lien balance was and potentially have had an equity situation on our hands for a full payoff. So that's, some of the triage that you'd expect with a larger portfolio is going to be making these decisions. Definitely be comfortable with the negotiations that you're putting out there. If you're willing to settle for 50% on the dollar and you're going to honor the timeline that you award that potential discount through, then you have to honor it because that's what you put out there. In this case, it was most likely an equity account, and if we had a higher touch collection campaign, we probably could have gotten closer to a full payoff here. So something to learn on my end in this, a takeaway for my own sake, is to increase some of these formulaic incentives to be in line with expectations for non-performing loan sales. So when we did this deal, 50 cents on the dollar was a pretty good price for a non-performing junior lien. Especially when the senior's unknown, 50 cents on the dollar would be way high on that. But because pricing has increased, and in our latest offering, we saw a lot of deals at like 70% of the unpaid principal balance for non-performing junior liens, we should in the future increase the no questions asked discounted settlement availability to closer to 70%, because that gives us kind of an indifference between selling the loan or settling the loan. Of course, it's not entirely an indifference. We'd always prefer to settle the loan. It's not kicking the can, it's helping the borrower, it's releasing the lien from title. But at least in that case, the worst case scenarios are being mitigated. So in this case, $7,000 was a 278% internal rate of return for the non-performing loan resolution. Call it a fix and a flip. Well, actually, no, don't call it a fix and a flip. That's the next case study here. This was a lump sum settlement. So that settlement of $7,000 over 11 months offered us almost a 300% internal rate of return. And that was 50 cents on the dollar from a purchase of 14 cents on the dollar. So pretty decent deal and helped the borrower out tons in this case. So this next one is a reperforming second. And this is why I said fix and flip, because when you create a non-performing loan, when you buy a non-performer and you turn it into a reperformer, you're basically fixing it up so you can sell it for more to an investor that's looking for cash flow. This one was secured by a condo and we sold it for $24,258. So let's look at the numbers here. The condo is worth $147,100. The senior balance is $92,087. That leaves us $55,013 of equity, securing our $42,314 balance. So it's pretty good. That's a full equity account. The investor is totally covered. The borrower is totally covered. The combined loan to value is less than 100%. So a couple questions on sales, bulk or retail. This was a portfolio bulk sale of reperforming loans. Some due diligence findings. The senior lien is current. The junior is on ACH, which means automated clearinghouse. This is automatic withdrawals every month, so it's very consistent. They've paid for 11 months now at $392 per month. That's a 7.5% interest rate. 120 payments is the full term of the mod. And senior plus junior lien payments is less than 28% of the borrower's total gross income. So before we made this modification, the junior lien payment amount specified on the original contract was a lot higher than $392, and their percentage of their total gross income was above 35%. So by modifying this loan at a lower percent, at a lower interest rate, longer term, getting it down to $392 per month, we brought the borrower's expenses more in line with their gross income. And in this case, it was full equity coverage, and the taxes and the homeowners association dues were current here. So the final purchase decision from the buyer in this case was to buy the loan for $23,000 and continue honoring the terms of the modification. Now, they didn't have a choice. They have to honor the terms of the modification. That's what they're buying. The loan is already contract with the borrower. But just to specify, they're buying this for the cash flow. So some other considerations here. The non-performing loan was purchased for $13,000. So we fixed it, flipped it within 13 months, and that's around an 80% internal rate of return. Now we can use that capital, that $23,000, to put back into more non-performers to resolve some more debt, to help some more borrowers out, and then either hold those loans for the cash flow ourselves or sell them to investors that are looking for cash flowing assets. Now, in this case, it was a condo collateral. So very important when you have condos, and even in some single family residential properties, to monitor for a homeowners association. So HOA dues, just like taxes, are going to, in many cases, be senior to both the first and the second position mortgage. So you want to make sure that they're current. In this case, the borrower is very communicative. There's no excuses for the previous lapse in payments. They wanted to get on the mod right away, and we're very eager to honor their debt and to get back into good standing. So they're working hard to bring those finances in order, and that's the type of borrower that we like to work with, because it's a win-win for everybody, and if we can help them and they can help themselves, it's good for the investor, it's good for the borrower, it's good for everybody involved. So in this case, that $23,000 was $24,000, my mistake. $258 was 57.3% of the balance, and an 18.7% cash on cash return for the note buyer. So the person who bought this reperforming loan is making back 18.7% on their money every single year until the loan is paid off, which will not be at a break-even point because they owe $42,000 plus the interest over the life of the loan. So it's going to be a huge internal rate of return, especially if the borrower pays off the loan early through a refinance or a sale of the property. 18.7% is almost like the low end expectation here if the borrower just continues to make that monthly payment every single month. All right, so that's it for the case studies here. Let's go on to our 15-minute consultation. If you would like to get on a consultation call with me, I would be so happy to. All you have to do, I prefer that you subscribe, like, and comment on this video first, but then all you have to do is go to robbymax.youcanbook.me, pick a time on my calendar, we'll get on a 15-minute call. I can talk to you about the mastermind group, why that might be a great option for you, or we can talk tactically on your portfolio. We can talk about other real estate topics, internet businesses. We can even talk about the API conversation we had today. So much to talk to you about. I'd love to hear from my viewers. So please book a 15-minute consultation with me so we can get to know each other a little bit better. So our upcoming schedule is the mastermind call on the first Wednesday of the month, and the Be the Bank show that you're watching today on the last Wednesday of the month. So for mastermind members, May 5th, that's the first Wednesday of May, we're getting on our next call. We've got 2 speakers lined up, and that's going to be an exciting one. We actually have four or five calls under our belt now, and they're all recordings are available in the mastermind group. So it's been really awesome, and I hope that you'll join us live for that as a member. And then next call is going to be on the YouTube channel. Next show is May 26th, the last Wednesday of May. Please tune in live at 1 p.m. Eastern time so that you can ask questions and hang out with me here on the show. A couple last things to mention on the Mortgage Note Mastermind. There's 62 members now as of today. You'll be able to access our private Podio workspace, which has all of this and more. Then also 50% off my consulting rates and monthly member Zoom calls, and of course recordings of all the previous Zoom calls. So this membership group is increasing little by little up to the eventual point of being a $10,000 per year membership. Now, right now it's only $80 a month, but with every 10 new members, we increase the price by $10. So we've got 4 more slots available at $80 per month. We filled 6 spots already at $80, and then the next 10 members will be accepted at $90, the next 10 after that at $100, $110, $120. The price is going to continue to increase as the network effect increases and the value in this group increases. By the way, I wasn't planning on mentioning this, but I definitely should. On my LinkedIn, I just posted a job application. I posted a help wanted ad so that we can hire a community manager dedicated solely to the mastermind group. So now that we've reached 62 members and we've got some traction and some momentum going here, we're going to bring somebody else on to help with the marketing and really mostly live within Podio to assist with adding as much value as possible within the group page. So I would, if you're interested, definitely check that out on my LinkedIn. Maybe you could apply. And if you're interested as a member, just know that the value proposition here is going to continue to increase as the price increases. So FIXnotes.com/MNM, you can learn a lot more there. For the private Podio workspace, 50% off consulting rates, monthly membership Zoom calls, permanently increasing in price with each 10 members. So sooner the better, definitely check it out. Oh, and by the way, there's an affiliate program where you can make all your money back and then some. We pay up to 100% of the first monthly dues for new member referrals. So if you refer just 1 member a month, you'll not only pay your monthly due, but as the price increases, you're going to get paid more than the cost to get in the group now. So definitely lock in your rate today. It's going to continue to grow. We're going to cap it at 1,000 members eventually. And one day, hopefully, have some in-person events. So lock in your rate now. I highly recommend it. And all of our 62 members are very, very happy with the group so far. So definitely reach out if you have any questions there. And for members, if you don't know, you go to podio.com/fixnotes/mastermind to get into that portal. Okay, hey, so we got through the whole show and we didn't even look at the fish. Look at all that pollen. Let's see about our telephoto lens. There's nobody out there. Our other crooked camera. Well, that's about it. But what I'm going to do is go feed the fish. And hopefully then they'll hang out on the camera for us. There's a goldfish. Some koi. Awesome. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, it is my pleasure to present. Oh, wait, we just had our big guy come by. I'll go out there with the food. It's my pleasure to present this show to you every week. Thank you so much for tuning in for Be the Bank, the very best place on the internet to learn about the secondary mortgage market. And if you want to see some koi, hang out for just another minute. I'm going to, I'll just put it on the koi cam and then I'll just go out there. So I'll see you guys very soon in the backyard. Have an awesome week and a great month, because we'll be back next month, first Wednesday of May, for our next show. And if not, I'll see you in the meantime, either on my socials or maybe in my calendar for a free consultation. Okay, let me do all this. I'll see you out back.